Chapter 1. The Mask of Adoration. Annabelle lived in a quiet corner of Savannah, Georgia, where moss-draped oaks lined the streets and time seemed to stretch just a little slower. Her apartment was on the second floor of a weathered Victorian home, filled with worn paperbacks, amber-colored lighting, and the soft hum of classical music. She was 32, a high school English teacher known among students for her sharp wit and gentle presence. But outside the classroom, her world had grown increasingly narrow. 2 years had passed since her last relationship ended in quiet collapse, a slow erosion of trust that left her wary yet craving connection. Loneliness crept into her evenings like fog, blurring her focus and stealing her appetite. Her friends encouraged her to try online dating again, suggesting curated apps for serious people. After weeks of hesitation, she made a profile. It was honest, perhaps too honest. She wrote about her love of old cemeteries, her volunteer work at the Historical Society, her habit of falling asleep to audiobooks about Gothic architecture. There were no bikini selfies, no curated vacation shots, just a warm smile, a glimpse of a bookshelf, and a dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre. For a while, nothing happened. Then came a message. The sender's name was Jack. Jack didn't open with a tired pickup line or a compliment about her appearance. Instead, he referenced a quote from Virginia Woolf, tying it to the fleeting feeling of dusk in Savannah. His words were precise, evocative, and disarmingly thoughtful. She replied cautiously. He responded the next morning with another literary connection, this time weaving in a story about a forgotten church he once photographed in rural Georgia. Something in his tone, polished but not pretentious, intimate without being invasive, pulled her in. What began as casual conversation deepened into nightly correspondence. Jack always seemed to know the right questions to ask. He never pushed too far, never made her feel small. When she shared her insecurities about aging alone, about losing her father too young, about feeling invisible in family gatherings, he listened, or rather, he responded with uncanny empathy, as if he already knew what silence had taught her. He recalled details most men forgot: her favorite poet, her fear of flying, the story about her student who wrote a haiku about grief. She began checking her phone first thing in the morning, last thing before sleep. His messages became part of her routine, a tether to something that felt genuine. Jack told her he lived in Atlanta, traveled frequently for consulting work, and wasn't ready yet for a face-to-face meeting. He apologized for the delay, explained that the timing had to be right, that he wanted their first meeting to be perfect. Annabelle accepted it, reluctantly at first, but then with increasing trust. He sent photos, vague enough to protect his privacy, but plausible enough to believe. They were black and white, artistic, with angles that suggested mystery rather than clarity. In one, he sat on a windowsill, face mostly turned away, a coffee mug in hand. In another, he photographed his shoes beside a copy of Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. Something about him felt constructed, but she told herself that everyone filters online. He never asked for photos she didn't want to send. He praised her mind, her humor, her soul. He made her feel seen. And yet, beneath the comfort, a faint unease began to stir. There were patterns she couldn't name, phrases that felt familiar, a rhythm in his writing she couldn't place. His references sometimes mirrored things she'd posted years ago on her private blog, things she hadn't mentioned in their chats. Occasionally, he would mention anecdotes from Savannah with suspicious specificity, as though he had once lived there too. But the doubt was fleeting, overshadowed by the warmth of his words. She wanted it to be real. She needed it to be real. What Annabelle couldn't imagine, what she didn't allow herself to even consider, was that the man behind the perfect messages wasn't a stranger at all. He wasn't in Atlanta. He wasn't new to her world. He had been watching her for years, studying her patterns, waiting for the moment she let her guard down. And he knew exactly where the cracks in her soul ran deepest. Chapter 2. Broken Threads. In the safety of her late-night chats with Jack, Annabelle began to open doors she had kept closed for years. What started as musings about literature and quiet observations slowly shifted into confessions. She wrote to him about the fatigue that settled in her bones by Thursday afternoons, about the noise of teenagers that filled her classroom and left her both alive and drained. She described the isolation of adult friendships, the sting of hearing nothing from old companions until they needed something. But most of all, she wrote about her family. She told Jack about her brother Randall, the perfect son, the clever golden boy who had always known how to manipulate a room. Even as children, Randall's power had been subtle, but undeniable. At birthday parties, he made jokes that turned the attention on himself, often at her expense. He once locked her out of the house as a prank, then claimed it was her fault for being too sensitive. Their parents had laughed. Randall had a way of framing cruelty as humor, and his charm made others forgive him before she could even process the insult. Their father, a calm but emotionally distant man, passed away 5 years ago, and afterward, their mother leaned heavily on Randall for support. He took up space in every conversation, made decisions about family holidays without asking, and dismissed Annabelle's opinions as dramatic or impractical. Jack read every word. He responded with gentle understanding, often offering perspectives that soothed her. He called Randall's behavior what it was: manipulation, gaslighting, emotional erosion. Annabelle had never heard someone describe it so clearly, and it gave her a sense of validation she hadn't realized she was craving. She began to trust Jack more than she trusted her own instincts. In her mind, he became not just a confidant, but a kind of lighthouse, an unwavering presence in the fog of her daily life. With each passing week, the boundaries of their conversations dissolved. She spoke about her mother's subtle favoritism, about the way her achievements were always noted with faint surprise rather than pride. She admitted to feelings of invisibility, to moments when she doubted whether she was even worthy of love. Jack never interrupted or minimized her pain. Instead, he echoed it, mirroring her thoughts in such a precise way that it felt like he was reading her soul. Then, small inconsistencies began to surface. One evening, after a long and difficult day at school, she had messaged Jack about her anxiety regarding a new evaluation policy that was being introduced in her district. She explained how a recent observation had left her feeling judged and exposed. Jack consoled her, offered empathy, and even quoted a line from a teacher's memoir she once mentioned. It felt intimate, real. 2 days later, during Sunday dinner at her mother's house, Randall made a passing joke, too precise to be coincidence. He mocked the overly sensitive attitudes of modern teachers who cried over feedback forms. His tone was casual, but the words were surgical. Annabelle froze. The phrasing was almost identical to the one she had used in her message to Jack. No one else knew what she had written. She tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the suspicion rooted itself inside her like a hairline crack in glass. Jack, meanwhile, grew more forward, not aggressively, but in small, curated steps. He began to mention her appearance more often, complimenting not just her mind, but her smile, her posture, the delicate line of her collarbone. He framed his admiration in poetic terms, but the underlying tone had shifted. One night, he asked if she had ever taken a photo just for herself, something not for social media, not for the world, but as a form of self-celebration. The way he asked was soft, almost reverent. She hesitated, then complied. She took a photograph. It was tasteful, muted, cropped close, vulnerable, but not explicit. She sent it to him, her fingers trembling. He responded with gratitude, told her she was radiant, that she should see herself the way he saw her. She tried to feel empowered, but a shadow of unease curled in her chest. Then he vanished. The next day brought silence. No reply, no message. The typing bubble that had become her heartbeat each night was gone. Days passed. She checked the app obsessively, even tried messaging from a second account. Nothing. Jack had disappeared without explanation, and the absence felt surgical, like someone had reached into her chest and removed something essential. A week later, in the family group chat, normally reserved for coordinating birthdays and holiday meals, a strange message appeared. It was from an unfamiliar username, the kind someone might create in seconds. The message contained a veiled joke about teachers and their selfies, followed by a blurry, darkened image. It was heavily distorted, but Annabelle's stomach dropped. The shape, the framing, it was her photo, the one she had sent only to Jack. No one reacted in the chat. A few hours later, the message disappeared, but Annabelle's heart didn't stop pounding. She understood then that her most intimate self hadn't been shared. It had been studied, twisted, and used. And the person responsible wasn't a stranger. He had known what to say, what to ask, and when to disappear. He had known her patterns, her pain, and how to exploit both. And worst of all, he had probably been sitting across from her just days ago at the dinner table, smiling. Chapter 3. No Rules Left. Annabelle's hands shook as she shut her laptop for the third time that night, but the silence didn't calm her. The room felt too still, too knowing. Every sound from the street below seemed loaded with suspicion. The message in the family chat had disappeared, but the damage had rooted itself inside her. The timing, the language, the photo, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Someone close to her had seen what she never intended anyone else to see. Someone had betrayed her. She deleted the dating app first, then wiped her entire phone, restoring it to factory settings. It gave her a momentary sense of control, a way to feel like she was scrubbing the contamination from her life. But even with the app gone, the dread remained. The feeling wasn't just that she had been watched, it was that she had been studied, mimicked, and manipulated. For the first time in years, she turned to her background in digital media, a skill she had almost forgotten she possessed. Late into the night, she researched how to track IP addresses from message activity. She downloaded an obscure security application designed for tech professionals, the kind of tool buried deep in forums and only recommended by those who knew how to stay anonymous. The app promised metadata extraction from cached messaging logs, even those embedded in backups. When she connected her phone to her old laptop and ran the first extraction, nothing obvious appeared. Most of the activity pointed to encrypted VPN traffic, bouncing from location to location: Singapore, Frankfurt, Los Angeles. But one entry stood out: a slip. A message had been sent at 2:03 a.m., 5 weeks prior, without a VPN cloak. It originated from Savannah. Not just Savannah, but from a residential block less than 4 miles from her own apartment. The network name was generic, but the router's signature was traceable. She stared at the blinking line of code, nausea rising in her throat. She pressed deeper. The app revealed that multiple emails had been connected to the same shadow account used to contact her. Some were gibberish aliases, throwaways created for anonymity. But one had been reused years ago, back when her brother Randall briefly launched a podcast and asked her to subscribe. She had helped him set up the mailing list. The email handle, Walters Just Speak, came rushing back like a slap. It had once belonged to her brother. It was inactive now, technically deleted. But the archive didn't lie. It had been used as a recovery email for one of Jack's alternate profiles. She opened a separate tab, accessed her old export tool from graduate school, an outdated but reliable program meant to archive full message threads for offline analysis. It was glitchy, prone to crashing, but if it worked, it could extract unfiltered logs of everything she'd sent and received. It took over an hour. When it finished, the exported file filled the screen with a mountain of messages, chats, timestamps, metadata. She scrolled through them, not reading at first, just scanning. But patterns began to emerge. Jack had always been responsive, almost too much so. He had replied within seconds on evenings when she was at her mother's house, moments after Randall had stepped outside to smoke or take a call. The correlation was too tight. The overlaps were no longer ignorable. Then came the final proof. In one of the oldest backup folders, a profile photo linked to the original Jack account failed to load. Instead, the program displayed the raw file name used to upload the image. It read, Randy Alch 3 JPG. She stopped breathing. Her heart pounded as her thoughts unraveled. The man she had trusted with her grief, her shame, her most fragile secrets had never existed. Every compliment, every line of empathy, every shared quote had come from Randall, her brother, the one who had humiliated her since childhood, who had always needed to feel smarter, stronger, more in control. Now he had worn her trust like a costume, stepping into the perfect persona to make her feel desired, only to shatter that feeling from within. She stood from the desk, stumbling backward like the air had gone thin. Rage and horror coursed through her in waves, but beneath it all was something colder, a clarity that cut deeper than panic. This hadn't been curiosity or boredom. This had been premeditated. He had built the character of Jack to infiltrate her mind, to pull her apart from the inside, and when the game had gone far enough, he had vanished, leaving just enough behind to make her doubt her own perception. Annabelle gripped the edge of the desk until her knuckles went white. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was war, and she finally knew the face behind the mask. Chapter 4. Boiling Point. In the weeks that followed her discovery, Annabelle lived in a strange limbo between fury and paralysis. Her days passed in habitual rhythm, teaching Shakespeare to distracted teenagers, preparing lesson plans, buying groceries. But beneath the surface, her mind churned with a quiet, relentless storm. Every interaction felt artificial, every family message in the group chat like a trap. Randall continued as if nothing had happened. He sent memes, shared updates about their mother's garden, and even commented on old photos in the family cloud. The audacity made her sick. She wanted to scream, to forward the screenshots to every contact in her phone, to drive to her mother's house and lay bare the rot that had festered for years beneath the facade of their respectable family. But fear anchored her. Fear of not being believed, fear of being dismissed as dramatic or vindictive. Randall had always been the clever one, the manipulator in a tailored smile. He knew how to make people doubt their instincts. He'd done it since they were children. So she waited. She spoke about it only in one place, her therapist's office. Behind the safety of a locked door and a box of tissues, she laid out the entire web. How Jack had never existed, how Randall had crafted an identity to invade her emotions, how he had vanished and left her humiliated. Her therapist didn't flinch. She listened, took notes, and then said the words Annabelle hadn't allowed herself to speak aloud. Emotional abuse. Not just betrayal, not just cruelty. Abuse. Deliberate, psychological, calculated. That word shattered something inside her, and in the space left behind, something else began to take root. Resolve. She knew she couldn't confront him in private. He would twist it, gaslight her, minimize it. But she also knew she couldn't stay silent. Silence was the ecosystem in which Randall thrived. Every time she'd swallowed her pain for the sake of keeping peace, he had grown stronger. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ending a pattern that had dictated her entire life, so she began to prepare. Late at night, she returned to her files. She organized the exported messages into folders: manipulation, identity building, emotional intimacy, and the most damning, crossed lines. She highlighted messages that proved the link between Randall's real behavior and Jack's persona. Specific phrases, inside jokes, even typos he repeated in both identities. She matched timestamps with family events and pulled surveillance logs from the security app she'd installed after her phone's breach. She even used a text-to-speech program to recreate some of Jack's messages with a synthetic male voice, setting them against black backgrounds with her own screenshots layered beside. Every file was time-stamped, every folder labeled. It wasn't just evidence. It was a case file. The more she assembled, the more she reclaimed. For the first time, the shame began to lift, not because it had disappeared, but because she had redefined it. It wasn't her shame anymore. It was his. The perfect opportunity came naturally. Their mother's birthday had always been a formal affair. Family dinner, fancy cake, matching outfits for the inevitable photo. Randall had offered to host this year, of course. Annabelle agreed to attend, calmly, without hesitation. It surprised him. She could see it in his raised eyebrow, but she smiled, played her part. Let him believe she was moving on. What she was really doing was rehearsing. In the week leading up to the event, she placed her dossier onto a small flash drive. She copied it twice, one for playback, one as backup. She tested the files on her own TV, then again on her mother's spare laptop during a casual visit, under the pretense of helping her clean up memory. It worked perfectly. A single click would play the compilation in sequence: messages, images, voiceovers, metadata. No passwords, no pauses. Just truth, laid bare. She didn't tell anyone. Not her colleagues, not her friends, not even her therapist. There was no point in gathering allies. What she needed wasn't validation. It was silence long enough to make her words thunder when she broke it. The only person she informed was herself. She looked in the mirror that morning and said, without trembling, that today would be the last day she let Randall's version of reality define hers. She dressed simply, carried no gifts, just the flash drive in a velvet box that had once held an old necklace from her father. She arrived early, smiled at the guests, hugged her mother, and chatted with cousins. Randall greeted her with mock warmth, hand briefly resting on her shoulder like he owned the moment. She didn't flinch. She waited. She knew exactly when it would be time, and when it came, no one would be able to look away. Chapter 5. The Feast of Exposure. The house was already full by the time Annabelle arrived. Laughter spilled from the windows, and the soft chime of glasses echoed through the hallway. Vanilla and cinnamon hung in the air, mingling with the savory scent of baked ham and rosemary. Her mother had outdone herself again. Fresh white flowers on every table, matching napkins folded like lilies, jazz humming from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. Every detail was curated for harmony, for illusion. It was the kind of night where nothing was supposed to go wrong. Annabelle entered with measured grace, a soft smile on her lips and a box wrapped in midnight ribbon resting in her hands. Her coat, beige and clean, matched the muted tones of her dress. She greeted relatives with polite warmth, accepting hugs and cheek kisses, answering familiar questions about work and health. No one noticed the tension behind her eyes, the calculation in her movements. They saw only what she allowed them to see. Randall spotted her from across the room, leaned casually against the kitchen island with a drink in hand, laughing too loudly at one of his own stories. He crossed the room with his signature swagger, wrapping an arm around her in a performative embrace before whispering something sardonic under his breath. She didn't react. His smirk faltered for half a second. Then he moved on, already charming another circle of guests. Dinner was long, as expected. Wine flowed. Compliments were exchanged. Stories recycled for the 100th time. Her mother beamed at the head of the table, accepting praise with practiced modesty. Randall led the conversation, punctuating it with jokes that made everyone laugh and Annabelle ache. When dessert was served, a rich lemon tart surrounded by berries, her mother raised a toast, thanking her children, the guests, and the gift of family. That was her moment. Annabelle stood, steady and composed. She thanked everyone for coming and said she had brought something special, a family gift, though not a traditional one. There were polite chuckles. She reached beneath the table and lifted the velvet box, unwrapping it slowly before placing the flash drive in her hand. She walked to the living room, connected it to the television's USB port, and turned to the room. Conversations faded. Glasses stilled. No one knew what to expect. The screen lit up in silence. The first image was a neutral title card. For the sake of truth. Then came a black screen with text. The following is not fiction. These are real messages, sent to me under false identity by someone sitting in this room. A synthetic male voice began to read. At first, the words were soft, tender lines, compliments, echoes of vulnerability. On screen appeared her photos, the profile she had shared, casual snapshots, lines of poetry quoted in messages. The voice continued, growing darker, more possessive. The phrasing became twisted, manipulative. As the texts built toward emotional control, side-by-side overlays appeared, Randall's IP address logs, timeline comparisons, and linked usernames. There were highlighted excerpts where Jack's words mirrored Randall's real-life comments. The evidence was surgical. Guests shifted in their seats. Some glanced toward Randall. He had gone completely still. Then came the final slide, a full-screen overlay with his name, matched email addresses, metadata summaries, and a line at the bottom in bold white. The man behind Jack was never a stranger. The video ended in silence, a long, aching silence. Annabelle didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her mother sat frozen, one hand covering her mouth. Her aunt whispered something inaudible to her husband. A cousin quietly stood and left the room. Randall's face had drained of all color. He stared at the screen as if it might vanish if he waited long enough. But it didn't. It had happened. It had all happened. And now they all knew. The performance was over. The curated image of family unity had fractured. The fault lines that Annabelle had spent a lifetime navigating had ruptured in public. And in that rupture, for the first time, there was space to breathe. She turned, calmly retrieved the flash drive, and walked back toward the kitchen. No one stopped her. No one dared. Chapter 6. A house where she could breathe. After the birthday, the silence came like snowfall, thick, still, and absolute. No calls, no texts, no attempts to explain or confront. Randall vanished from every platform, his once active social media presence erased in a single day. Her mother, once overbearing with reminders and guilt, stopped responding entirely. Not even a passive-aggressive comment, just absence. The only message came from her aunt in the form of a brief email. "Your truth was too loud for this family." Annabelle read it once, then deleted it. The quiet didn't hurt the way she expected. It was not the sharp silence of abandonment, but the soft hush of distance finally earned. She didn't mourn the lack of contact. In fact, it felt like space, real, breathable space, for the first time in years. Her nervous system, once coiled like a spring, began to relax. Sleep returned in full nights instead of fractured hours. Food had taste again. She updated her resume and submitted it to schools in nearby districts, wanting a fresh setting but not a full escape. When an offer came from a magnet academy across the river, she accepted without hesitation. The position came with a modest salary increase and a smaller class size, but more importantly, it came without history. No shared looks in staff rooms, no whispered pity, just clean ground. She moved within the month. Her new house stood on a sloping street just above the marshes, with wraparound windows that caught the golden hours like they'd been designed for healing. The kitchen was smaller, the floors uneven, but there was a sunroom where she placed her reading chair and a back porch where morning mist rolled in like theater curtains. At night, she could hear frogs and nothing else. The old phone went into a drawer, turned off for good. The new one had no saved numbers except for her therapist, her new principal, and 2 close friends. No cloud backups, no app history, no phantom notifications. She didn't need to scroll anymore. The screen no longer held her reflection hostage. Therapy continued, but the tone had shifted. The conversations weren't just about survival now. They were about authorship, about what it meant to own your life without apology. She spoke of boundaries, of value, of the difference between forgiveness and permission. She no longer cried during every session. Sometimes she even laughed. She filled her new space slowly. No rush, no pressure. Each object had to earn its place. A second-hand record player, a set of blue and white mugs from a flea market, plants that didn't mind being forgotten now and then. On the wall in the living room, above the bookshelf, she hung a small framed print she had made herself. Black serif text on white paper. One sentence, "No one can break you when you shine a light on their darkness." It wasn't just a quote. It was a reminder. The woman who had once asked permission to exist was gone. The new Annabelle knew how to hold silence without swallowing it. She knew how to say no without guilt, how to leave the past unvisited, how to recognize manipulation dressed as love. She had no interest in revenge anymore. What she carried now was clarity. And in her new home, with the windows open and the river breathing below, that was more than enough.